Welcome to Conversations with Tom Shorkey. Conversations explores the past, the present, and the future of the communities in which we live through the eyes of interesting individuals. Now let's join our host, Tom Shorkey.
Welcome to Conversations. I'm Tom Shorkey, your host for today's program. Many of our viewing audience are familiar with a Tom Hanks movie, Forrest Gump. And the premise in that movie was many historical things occurred in about a 35-year period, and no matter where it was in the country, Tom Hanks showed up in the background. Our guest today is a little bit like Tom Hanks in that movie, because you cannot be at an event in St. Clair, have a project going on, a fundraiser, without the same person continually showing up. And it's not always in the back of the room, it's right up where the decisions get made. I'm very honored today on Conversations to welcome Dan Lockwood as today's guest. Welcome, Dan.
Welcome. Delighted to invite me.
I'm glad you're here. Now, Dan, you wear many hats in the community. You're retired from business and probably work harder now than maybe you did back when you were with Blue Water. But for our listeners at home who are familiar with you, they've seen you at events throughout the community, they've seen you at the microphone at city council meetings, fundraising activities of all sorts. But tell us a little bit about Dan Lockwood. You're not a St. Clair kid. Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in a lot of places. My father's retired Air Force, and we've lived in a number of states in the United States, and I've also spent 3 years in Japan. Graduated from North Farmington High School in Michigan, and then I went to Eastern Michigan University.
And what kind of major would a man have at Eastern Michigan University?
Well, mine's business management.
Business management. So, okay, you're all over the world, Air Force child, North Farmington High School graduate, Eastern Michigan and Ypsilanti. You get the business degree. Tell our listeners about maybe your early career.
Well, it was interesting. I graduated from college and I could not get a job. I was 1A in the draft. And for the people who've been born after the Vietnam War, they may not understand the draft and the rating system, but I was available. And I had a number of job interviews, and literally it would come down to myself and someone else, and the other person would get it because he wasn't 1A. And 1A meant that I was draftable, and the problem with the employer was they had to keep my job open. So when I got out of the service, my job would be available, and none of them wanted that risk, so they just wouldn't hire me. And I want to say it was sometime after Labor Day, the draft board announced what number they thought they would get to, and I was about 5 numbers past that.
Great.
So a guy I had an interview called me up and offered me a job, and I accepted. And it was a small CPA firm.
And how did that job in that small CPA firm end up to you living and working in St. Clair County?
Well, it's like anything. It's a long story. Started with, like I said, the gentleman was a sole practitioner. Set for the exam. Didn't pass it the first time, and then I switched firms. I suddenly realized that I had no future with this gentleman. I went with another firm, and so happened that Carl Haas, who's a resident here in the community, was working there. We both passed the CPA exam while we were working with this firm. We worked together a lot. I left that firm, went with another CPA firm, really learned a lot from there. And then one of my clients offered me a job, moved me to Texas, and that just wasn't to my liking. And I was looking for a job, and Carl was looking for a controller. So I moved up to St. Clair.
Well, and you know, there's a little bit of a history there. In this community, people are familiar when they go by on Yankee Road, the industrial park, the Christian Haas Industrial Park, but there really was some tragedy involved with the Haas family that eventually brought you to St. Clair. Could give our listeners just a little background on how that occurred?
Well, Chris was really a unique gentleman, and he invested in a lot of plastic plants. And quite frankly, that's why there were a lot of plastic plants in St. Clair. But in 1979, Chris's oldest son, Art, died. and Chris was out of state at that time and flew in and had a heart attack. So they both died within 3 days of each other.
Wow.
Carl had joined the company. He had left the firm that I had worked with him at and was the controller. I think he had been here about a year when the death occurred, and he suddenly became the president of the company. About a year later is when I joined, and I joined. Chris was, if he thought you were a good guy, he put you in business. And Ernie Oskin tells a story about Huron Plastics. And Ernie says, it was my 40th birthday. I'm a technical rep for DuPont, and I'm talking to Chris. And I'm lamenting that it's pretty obvious at 40 years old and a technical rep, I'm not going to become president of DuPont. And Chris says, well, why don't you start your own company? And Ernie says, I thought about it. And I said, okay. So what Chris did is he financed me. He gave me my manufacturing guy. He set up the accounting system for me. And then let me go on my own. For 5 years, Ernie was pretty much dependent on Blue Water for his sales. And then he brought a partner in, Art Sackerson. And Art just went out and got all kinds of sales. And Huron's another story, and went on that way. My job when I first came was to consolidate. So what I did was all the companies were run separately. I consolidated them. We got rid of a couple of them. And from there we started.
And Blue Water at the time, and I don't want to date any of us, but back in, I think it was 1968, the movie The Graduate,
right,
when Dustin Hoffman graduated from college, and the advice at the graduation party was go into plastics. Well, you had a chance to be in plastics. I guess we would call it in the heyday, in the 80s, in the 90s, right up through what has occurred with that particular industry over let's say, the last 10 years. But Blue Water was in a lot of communities, and that kind of paid off for you in different ways with the contacts you made in a variety of communities. How'd that work?
You're really right. During the 80s, early 90s, it was the heyday, the golden age for plastics, automobile in particular. And we went from an art to a science. We went from machines that used relays to microprocessors. We went, depending on the guy who had some unique talent and could make a part, to using statistics to figure out why a part was good and why it was bad, and really backtrack that right into the processing of the machine. So we could predict a bad part. Just really was phenomenal from that standpoint. But at the same time, we started to expand. And like I said, the core group was the plant in St. Clair, Blue Water Plastics, plant in Marysville called Blue Water Plastics Corporation, and then Lexington Plastics. From there, we expanded, and one of the interesting stories I'll tell you was Jordan Creek Plastics. And
which is located?
Well, Jordan Creek Plastic is located, I'm sorry, it's no longer called that for the people around here, and I'm trying to, it's EPC 2 or 3.
Right on Range, kind of Range and Brown.
Right, it's right at Range and Brown. And that plant, we had a financing issue on it, and it's a little technical, but in order to get some industrial development bonds, which is what we wanted to do, we had to go to the United States government and get a UDAG grant. And forget the acronym, but what it amounted to was the federal government granted the city of St. Clair $750,000. The city had to give that money to us. Give is the wrong word. They had to loan it to us. They loaned the money to us, and then we repaid it, and the city ended up with, I think, about $860,000. But because of that, we could go and get a $7 million bond to cover the cost of building that facility. The city then took that, and that's that $860,000 is the basis for the industrial park that they built on the north side of Yankee Road. One of the other things that we did for that was we were able to get a community block development grant and run a 14-inch water main down the Highlands to help Conlon and Jerry Emick with the Highlands. And then we teed that off and ran that over to Jordan Creek.
So one project leads to many.
Oh yeah, and
well, you know, Dan, with your background in business, and for our listeners at home, it is, well, we're not here to give you a tutelage on the plastics business, but it's a good background to have, because what you managed to do with your contacts in the community, and then you were a very active Rotarian, and with projects you got involved with Rotary, which led to the Community Foundation. So tell me how your job at Blue Water kind of segued into community involvement through a couple of these organizations.
I first got involved in Community Foundation, I want to say it was back in the late 80s, when St. Clair was really neat. Bonnier was the Speaker of the House, and trying to remember, the minority whip in the United States House of Representatives was, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Bonnier was the U.S. House of Representatives, and DeGrow was the Speaker of the House. So politically, St. Clair County was very powerful, and this was the first year when Clinton was elected, and Hillary was trying to put one through this new health system. The Kellogg Foundation didn't really support a nationwide system. So what they were doing is, and they used St. Clair County as one of the study bases to come up and see if we could come up with a community-based way of managing healthcare. And one of the things you got to realize with a national healthcare system is you have your decision makers in Washington, and they don't really concern themselves with the issues here in St. Clair. Having said all that, a lot of money was funneled in St. Clair. I got selected to be involved in one of the panels to manage how we did it, and we never came up with a solution. But later on, after I retired, Frank Moore got me involved on the board of the Community Foundation, and then from the Community Foundation, I've been involved in some of the different aspects, particularly the Finance Committee. And that's really been enlightening. I'll give you a little spoiler. The Finance Committee, the Community Foundation of St. Clair has been very fortunate. But for about the last 10 years, we've been in the top 25% on earnings on our funds. It's helped me personally because I've learned how to manage my own investments. But what we do is we don't chase earnings. We really try to look at risk and figure out how we're going to manage the risk. So we try to anticipate what the risks are, and we try to place ourselves so that we can minimize the risk effect on the portfolio. We have some great advisors who've helped us. And the other thing is, as the portfolio has grown, we're able to take risky investments, but we're able to do them in small portions, such as you've heard of hedge funds. Well, we have a hedge fund, but it's only 5% of our portfolio, so it doesn't really have an effect. But when the good stuff goes down, in theory, the hedge fund should go up.
Should balance.
But you don't want to go 100% hedge fund. You got to balance it out. But the problem is some of these funds require $1 million investments. Well, if your portfolio is if you do it more than 5%, it's probably a too risky investment for you. You don't want to do it. So I just say that there's a lot of funds who maybe have $100,000, and unfortunately they're limited to bank CDs, which really don't earn anything. But this is where we can help these people if they come in and combine our funds, because again, like I said, right now we're managing close to $50 million. So,
and being able to assist these communities in so many worthwhile projects is really the
well,
the
just give an example. I mean, St. Clair is very fortunate with the number of funds that are set up to benefit St. Clair. There's a fund that's got about $600,000 in it called Citizen for St. Clair, and it's just made up of people in the community who have contributed to it. You say $600,000, what do you do with it? Well, it generates about $25,000 a year in income. And that $25,000 can be spent. How do you want to spend it? Now, there's a board, a group of contributors who meet and talk about that and decide how they're going to invest that $25,000. And, they do little things.
Well, let's talk about something with our community then. In 2007, you were part of a visioning group.
I was.
And there was a lot of hoopla about let's build a vision for the future of this community. And I think a lot of interesting things came up and kind of got into the hopper. Whatever happened with that?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you, we couldn't have done it without help from the Community Foundation.
Yeah. Well, see, there we are.
So we had some help. But that generated, what people don't realize, there was a lot of nice visions, but that report did not really generate action, or there was a lot of groundwork that had to be done. One of the assignments was given to the St. Clair, City of St. Clair's Planning Commission, and they created an overlay district in the downtown area based on form-based zoning. Now, form-based zoning is a little different than traditionally what we're used to. The quick example is, under traditional zoning, you're required to have a side easement between you and the next building. Well, with form-based zoning, which is the way it was historically, you could build your building right up to the building next to you. One of the other changes was in form-based zoning, we have mixed use. So we have commercial on the first floor, and the second floor can have residential, which is something which has been enacted. But if you notice in our downtown, we have no residential, or very little. We only have Palmer Manor. But we don't have any businesses where the business operates on the first floor and there's an apartment on the second floor, which is what St. Clair had before the urban renewal program. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do is we want to get back to that. To follow up on that, literally this year, we just completed a downtown housing study. We are starting to get developers interested in doing some housing development in St. Clair and some commercial development. The question has been asked, is there a market? Well, we took it upon ourselves, again, at St. Clair DDA, and went out and found some funding, and were able to complete a study, and what we found is, yes, there is a market. It's not rope, but I'm going to say you could probably do 10 to 20 units a year would be filled. So if you were to build a 100-unit project, it would probably take you 5 years to fill it. If you're building a 10-unit project, you'd probably fill it within a year.
It's interesting.
So that's it. But again, there was a whole series of studies that we've done. The key that people need to realize is we created a project planning list. 5 pages, well over 90 action items that had to be followed up on. A lot of them we couldn't do right away because we didn't have the funding. But as the funding came up, we were able to have the project, because we had a plan. One of the plans, which has been around for a couple years and people will see, is Clinton Avenue. Now in the visioning, we had a boulevard going down Clinton Avenue, and it really looked pretty cool, I have to tell you. I really liked it.
Now, from M29
M29 to Fredmore Highway, 6th Street.
Oh, okay.
But what we found is when we went out there and actually did the survey, that the street right-of-way, the street is not located in the center of the street right-of-way. In fact, parts of the right-of-way go right up to the Pine River border, or the Pine River shoreline.
To the edge of the river?
So I mean, it was like, okay, it's a great idea, we can't do it. So what we came back with is what you see, the streetscaping project, where we had the street lights, and we've put in some monuments on there to show the history of St. Clair's shipbuilding ages during one gentleman.
Was the reconstituted plaza courtyard, was that part of that vision thing?
It was, and I think there's a picture that Paul's got on there that he can put on the screen for us.
Oh, there it is.
I'm sorry. And
now, if we could zero in on the corner of that photo, it would be interesting, because I think this visioning was done about 9 years ago. I think it was 2007.
Yeah.
So in 2007, the seed was planted, and in this past 12 months, this has come to fruition.
Yeah, we were able to find the funding. We were able to do. Now, the visioning plan that we have doesn't realize this. But what people need to realize is you need to create the thought. The most important part is we knew that that big cement plaza had to be replaced, and had to be replaced with grass. As we started getting the landscape architects in there, they started to nurture it and came up with an idea of making it into a small mini theater or a small amphitheater. And I think that the response that we've had from the community has just been absolutely phenomenal. It really looks nice. It really perks up that area. But one of the problems that we had to handle with that one, and it was really a big debated item, is Palmer Park, the boardwalk for most people, is such a phenomenal public place. How do you compete with it across the street? How do you get people to cross the street to come in and look at that? Mm-hmm. And what we decided is we can't compete with it. We've got to make it a part of it. And now we're still working on the crosswalk. We haven't given up on that. And I guess that leads into the next question on that visioning project, was Riverside Avenue or M29. As a road, it's not a good road. It's not a good road for downtown. Traffic is too fast.
And that was the thing we saw a few months ago in the paper, where it's 4 lanes going through town at 30 miles an hour.
It's 4 lanes, but it's actually 6 lanes.
Yeah, because there's parking on both sides.
You got parking on both sides. So if you're a pedestrian and you've got to cross that street, you just see this huge cement crosswalk a road you got to cross, and you see all these cars spinning down, and it's scary. The way you do it is you got to narrow the road, and it slows down traffic. We've been talking about this. I have found studies, community events, back to the 90s, or in fact 1990, and one of the top 5 negatives of St. Clair has always been M29. And it's amazing. I mean, I think we do these about every 5 years. Mm-hmm. And the only one that's very consistent is the traffic on M29. It's just something that everyone, and we've just never been able to move forward on this because it's a state highway. It's controlled by MDOT. But I had an experience this spring. Governor Snyder has reorganized the state, and we set up in prosperity regions, and we are no longer controlled out of the Macomb County MDOT office.
That has to be a positive.
And we've been moved to Bay City. And one of the engineers came down, and we're explaining to him the problem, the traffic, and he said something I've never heard from a state person before. He says, "I think I can help you." And I have to tell you, I almost had cardiac arrest.
The old adage, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help."
Yeah. And what he did, and it happened last month, he called a meeting, and it was held in the Voyager, and they had MDOT, DNR, MISTA, MEDC, and I'm sure a couple of agencies that I can't remember. And they came down and they looked at M29, and they said, "There's a problem here." And they said, "Problem you have is you have an intersection, a 3-way intersection, you have a drawbridge, and you have a railroad crossing all within 300 feet. And we have no models to follow up on." So out of that, my understanding is there's going to be a safety study. And with that safety study, there will be, it will make us eligible for a number of grants. So whatever comes out of that for solutions, we can go through. But the prime thing will be to slow the traffic down. We've got to get the traffic slowed down, and we've got to improve the crossings. One of the issues that we've had with MDOT is they will now allow more than 3 crossings between the St. Clair Inn and Clinton Avenue. So right now we have one at Clinton, we have one at J Street, we have one in front of the plaza, and we have one that goes across the St. Clair Inn from the entrance of the St. Clair and Ross. But there really should be one at Vine Street. There should be one at Adams Street. There should be a lot of other on there. If you want to make it a walkable community, you want a crosswalk every 200 feet. And they need to be marked to help people. But from that standpoint, I guess one of the things which gets into it is you got to have a plan so it can go through. And I'll get into the...
well, I think an important point is you need a plan, the vision, a plan. But I think so often in this get it for me now culture that we live in, that as you talked about, when we saw a photo of what the plaza could look like, 9 years later it has occurred. You've been involved with the Little League field development out on Fred Moore Highway. You've been involved with a number of Rotary projects. It really does take time to work through the red tape, the government regulations, et cetera. And with that, what are we going to see on that Sinclair Inn property, Dan? I know with all your different hats that you wear, you are probably as knowledgeable as anyone in the city about, is there progress going to be made? We know about a year or so ago there was a lot of action, a new owner, a number of meetings, and for our listening audience, they're probably wondering whatever happened with the Sinclair Inn project. What can you enlighten us about the inn?
Okay. First of all, I just got to back up one thing. When I talked to you about form-based zoning, one of the things that form-based zoning did is we allow 4-story buildings to be built on Riverside. And people need to understand that a developer is not going to come in and he's not going to replace any of the existing buildings that we have because he can't make any money on it. We've got to give him an incentive to do something bigger. So with that, let's talk about the St. Clair Inn. And the first thing I want to say, and the first question people have is, why isn't something happening? And Jeff is talking to the state, and the state has expressed interest in providing some funding to help the project. We have an idea what the amount is, but we don't know. Nothing's been said for sure. We've received all positive feedback. But if you're familiar with the Inn on the Water in Marine City, it took them 3 years to get approval from the state. One of the problems they have, and I don't know the details of it, but they did some things. And when you do things on your project, the state stops. So Jeff has been told repeatedly, you don't do anything. And I can tell you right now, he wants to go in there and he wants to rip off the wallpaper, he wants to get rid of all the carpeting and start the project. But he's been told repeatedly from the state, from his consultants, and even the county officials, because they were very heavily involved in the Marine City project, you don't do anything until the state tells you can do it. So that's why you're not seeing much happen. I mean, he's maintaining the property, and that's about it.
Now, with the property, though, before we segue into some of the ancillary across the street and next to it, is the plan for the inn to remain historically correct? So we may not see much on the outside, but once the state says it's time to go, it will be more inside?
Correct. The inn, because the financing project includes historical tax credits, you will see very little changes on the exterior. You may see some painting, and I should say that the roof is going to have to be replaced. But again, that becomes a discussion. Actually, it's with the National Park Service on how they're going to allow it to be replaced. But what Jeff will do is he's going to gut the interior. Now, when I say gut, I don't want people to get us. He's not going to get rid of any of the historical rooms. A lot of people have told him that the historical rooms are too small. But he feels that's part of the historical charm. He doesn't want to do it. But what he is going to do, he's going to pull all the plumbing. He's going to pull all the electricity. He's going to get rid of the HVAC system. He's going to replace all of that. So if you've looked at some of the computer services and people say, I had to wait a half hour for hot water and things like this, he sees that. And his plan's called to address it. So from the historical end, and the other rumor, he's not tearing down the north annex at this point.
Okay.
He needs the rooms. He is planning on aligning himself up with a national chain. And talking to other developers, they're telling us that about 25% of your reservations will come from the national association that you're planning to join. Now, he has not told us who he's planning to associate with, so if anyone tells you anything, it's pure speculation, because he's really been pretty tight-lipped about that.
But the exciting part are those other things he has
Well,
planned
let's
for
talk
the
about
property?
that.
Let's talk about that.
And first of all, let's talk about the captain's property.
And the captain's property, for people who aren't longtime St. Clair residents, is there were 2 buildings on the south end of the inn.
Actually, there were 3. But go
There
on.
were 3, yeah. And they were called the captain's house or the captain's quarters or whatever, and they were demolished probably within, what, last 10 years or so?
Well, some of them were demolished even before that, but yes, you're right.
And that's the property, we're talking the property, when we talk the captain's property, the south.
South of the St. Clair and
South
up
of
to the
the
city's
St. Clair.
pump house.
Okay.
And what Jeff has come up with is he wants to create an amphitheater, and I think Paul has it on the screen right now.
That's a great view, right?
Yeah, and if you look at the right side on there, you see the 2 amphitheaters, one on top of the other, all facing the river.
So the gray build, for our viewers, that little gray corner is the existing inn, and then we're moving south with
or to the left, yeah.
to our
Yeah, and what you see to the top of the screen is Riverside Avenue. Then what you see is 3 small buildings. Jeff recognizes that a wedding party, the bride needs that space to prepare for the wedding. So one of the rooms will be for the bride, the other room will be for the groom, and then there's just a gathering hut between the 2 of them. And then right in front of that, you see a brick patio. And that brick patio will be available for, again, for events if you want to do it, but it will have a bar and a grill. And then those 3 spaces that you see in front will be either bocce ball or shuffleboard courts. He's back and forth on those. And then you see the fire pits right in front of the river. And then the boardwalk will extend along that period on there. So
now we're going back a little north
Yeah.
towards the inn, and now when we're talking of Upper Chapel and Lower Chapel, what's going on?
again, he's visioning a lot of weddings, but they could be for all kinds of things. A corporation could have
But these are amphitheaters. These
Yes.
are outdoor seating.
yes, amphitheaters to look in the outdoor area. I think this is going to make St. Clair the outdoor wedding capital of Southeast Michigan. I just think it's just absolutely phenomenal, and you will see this being done at the same time the St. Clair Inn is being renovated. They'll
Great.
both be done at the same time.
And now we saw that part. Now let's talk about walking across the street from the St. Clair Inn, where the old timers will say it was Callahan's gas station. Other people will think it was Marcella's shop
Yeah.
on the corner. But what's going to happen across from the inn?
I think this is the most phenomenal thing that he's done. And what you're looking at here is a 5-story building. What's nice is it's not a brick wall. They've got recesses on it. The first floor would be commercial, and then the second, third, and fourth floor would be rental rooms. The second floor would be your traditional hotel room, where the third and fourth will be designed for long-term stays. They will have efficiencies, kitchens in there. They'll be larger, someplace between 700 and 1,000 square feet, plus or minus. Balconies. Starting with the third floor, you should be able to see over the roof of the St. Clair Inn. And the fourth floor will be absolutely phenomenal. And then what you see is a 5th floor roof bar. I think that this is, everyone who's seen this is like, okay, I'm ready. I think this is going to be just, I think it'll become a very popular place. I think it's just absolutely phenomenal. If we get a little longer view of this, what you'll see on if Paul would stop right there, you will see an entrance. He's going to have an indoor garage. What's interesting is the first floor will be entered from Vine Street, and if you look a little to the top right side, you will see another entrance for the top floor. What he's done is he's taken advantage of the slope of the land so he doesn't have to put a ramp in.
So as
what
people are aware, 2nd Street kind of
Right.
is up on a ledge, so to speak, and that would drive right into a parking area.
You got it. It's pretty phenomenal. He's going to have a small gym in there for people, and I think we've asked him if it might be available for people in the community. I don't know that. Not that he wants to compete with St. Clair Wellness. So my guess is he's probably not going to do it, but I don't know. So I think it's a pretty exciting plan.
And with all the grants, the red tape, the theoretically, and we won't hold you to it, but how long before the inn may be up and running? And
you tell me when the state's going to give him approval, and I'll tell you he'll probably start within 30 days after that.
Yeah.
I know he wanted to start in October, and if he would have started in October, he thought he would have it done the following year. If it takes him 12 months to do the inn, and by the way, the inn is first. The captain's property update will be at the same time, and then pretty close when the inn is done or getting near the finish is when he's going to start the other side, and that'll take about a year.
Dan, you've been involved in so many things in this community there, either whether it was growing up or part of your Blue Water career. Who are some of the people that have been influential in your life? If there are 2 or 3 people that you would say, I'm better off for knowing these people, who would that be?
You know, there's a number of people. A lot of people the local don't know, but I will say Carl Haas, and another person was Fred Moore. I'll just tell you a story about Fred, and it was back in the early 80s. I had just been there, and I was in front of the city council asking for them to approve something for us, and Fred was there, and council took a vote, and they did not approve his project. Well, Fred stood up and talked to them. And he talked to them for 20 minutes. And he got them to change the vote. Now, Tom, you've been involved in public long enough to know that when a politician makes a public statement of something and to get him to retract his position in the public is just absolutely phenomenal. And I've held Fred in awe ever since. And Carl and the Haas family has just been absolutely phenomenal. We always talk about corporations and how hard they are and all like this, and I got to tell you, every time Carl had to make a hard decision, he always thought about the employees and how it would affect him. And he just never, they were always a top concern for him. In fact, often he would discriminate against the officers or the salaried employees to help the hourly employees. I always thought that was crazy.
Yes.
But he was just absolutely phenomenal, and it was just, it was great. But there's a number of people like that in St. Clair.
All right, and I'm glad you mentioned the ones that you did. When we bring you back, not for a number of years yet, when we come back and do your 90th birthday celebration and we say, Dan, what do you want to be remembered for? What would that be?
That's an interesting question. I'd like to think that St. Clair is a more walkable community, because I think for downtown that's key. And when people feel comfortable about walking around, that's when your downtown will thrive. And when you have a thriving downtown, your community is thriving also. It's just, people don't realize how the two are tied together. Northville is a prime example. Back in the 80s, Northville is one of the first communities to have a DDA, Downtown Development Authority, and they created theirs in the 80s. And at that town, you could walk, a walkable house to downtown was selling for about $50,000. They really built that up. They've done a lot of really innovative things. That same house, going for about $500,000. And, don't get me wrong, people put money into the houses, but people want to live in a thriving community, and that's what everyone needs to understand. Is you make your downtown work, and the whole community is just better.
Dan, with we've just come off a very volatile political season. We don't do politics on this show, but you're in a position. You've done a lot in this community. You've been very successful in business and with a lot of organizations. If there were some words of wisdom that you could impart to, not to our high schoolers, they've got a lot of things on their plate at this time, but young adults, people in their 20s and 30s and starting their families, if you could give some words of wisdom to them about community, what would it be?
Get involved. It's just that simple. Don't sit around with your group and complain. Get involved, make a change. It's amazing. You may not get it the first time, but be persistent and, keep the emotion out of it. But you need the emotion to keep the energy up. But just keep at it if you believe it. And, and I think that's one of the things that makes St. Clair so great is if you're really passionate about something, you can make it happen. I'm always amazed at all the different things that go on in this community. It's a community of 5,000 people, and you go through and you find out, there's book clubs, there's music clubs, there's just active community. It's just a unique community.
Well, I think that involvement is a key part, and I think the other thing that maybe we have learned in our half hour together is things don't happen with a snap of a finger. It does. It takes a vision, then there's some planning, and there's an awful lot of patience, especially if you're looking for grants, you've got governmental red tape, but you've seen enough success that it is worth.
Oh yeah, you just got to go and
going for it.
Yeah.
On behalf of Channel 6 and watchctv.org, Dan, thanks for being our guest today on Conversations. I think it was insightful, and I think you provide a lot of information for our viewing audience. If the viewers at home want to see any of these shows, just go online to watchctv.org, click on shows, go to Conversations, and don't hesitate to share this interview with others that you know. And on behalf of Cable Channel 6, really appreciate not only Dan Lockwood being on the show today, but what he really has contributed to the betterment of our community over the last 35 years. Thank you for watching Conversations.
You've been watching Conversations with Tom Shorkey. Conversations explores the past, the present, and the future of the communities in which we live through the eyes of interesting individuals. If you have an idea for a future conversation, please contact us at www.watchctv.org. Thanks for watching Conversations with Tom Shorkey.